One Man Gang, real name George Gray. He was one of those wrestlers who didn't need to say much because his size said it all. He was billed at 6'9" and around 450 pounds, and when he stepped through those ropes, you knew somebody was about to have a bad night. But inside the storylines, plenty of wrestlers hated him, and for good reason. He was the roadblock, the boss fight, the guy who ended dreams and wrecked heroes. Let's talk about 7 wrestlers who hated One Man Gang, and how those rivalries made him one of wrestling's most dependable bad guys. Let's start with Jim Duggan. If you know anything about Duggan, you know the guy was pure red, white, and blue energy. Loud, tough, waving a 2x4 in the air, shouting, "Who?" He was the everyman hero. Fans loved him because he looked like the kind of guy you'd see working construction or cheering from the bleachers. He represented the working class, and he had the heart of a fighter. When he crossed paths with One Man Gang in the UWF, it was the perfect setup. You had this loud, proud, blue-collar hero against this enormous, brutal bully who didn't talk much but hit like a truck. Their feud became one of the top stories in the territory, and it all built toward one of the most emotional matches the UWF ever booked, a loser leaves town match. For newer fans, that stipulation might sound simple, but back then, it meant everything. The loser literally had to leave the promotion. No second chances, no rematch next week. It was final. And when One Man Gang beat Duggan, that was it. Duggan was gone from the UWF. Fans were stunned. They hated One Man Gang with real passion because it felt like he had not only won a match, but taken away their hero. But behind the scenes, there was a smart business reason for it all. Duggan was leaving to join the WWF, and Bill Watts wanted to make sure his exit made sense. If Duggan just disappeared, fans would have been confused. But if he got beaten by the biggest, meanest man in the company, then it made sense. He didn't quit, he was forced out. That's what made the story work so well. Duggan left looking like a fighter who just got overpowered by an unstoppable monster. And One Man Gang came out of it looking more dangerous than ever. It was a win for both. Duggan got to move up to the national stage, and Gang got all the heat from fans who wanted revenge. For 6 months, Gang held the UWF Heavyweight Championship like a warlord guarding his throne. Nobody could stop him. That run made him the top villain in the promotion and proved that he could carry a storyline on his shoulders. He wasn't just a big guy anymore. He was the guy you built your show around. That feud with Duggan is one of the best examples of how wrestling worked in the territory days. You had real storytelling built around simple emotions. Good versus evil, pride versus power, man versus monster. And One Man Gang played his part perfectly. Now let's rewind a bit to another major chapter. One Man Gang's time in the NWA and Championship Wrestling from Florida. This is where he got to mix it up with some of the biggest legends in the business, including none other than the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Dusty was the heart and soul of Southern wrestling. He was not tall, he was not jacked, and he did not look like a Hollywood action hero. But that was the point. Fans saw themselves in him. He was the man of the people, the guy who could talk his way into your heart and then fight his way out of trouble. Every time Dusty stepped into the ring, the crowd believed in him. So naturally, promoters wanted to find someone who could make Dusty's struggle look real, someone who could make fans worry that their hero might not make it out alive. That was where One Man Gang came in. In Florida, Gang was teamed up with another tough villain, Ron Bass. Together, they went after Dusty Rhodes and his ally, Blackjack Mulligan. These were big names, especially in the South. Mulligan was huge himself, and Dusty was the top draw in the territory. When Gang and Bass beat them for the NWA Florida United States Tag Team titles in November 1983, fans were shocked. That win meant more than just championship belts. It showed that One Man Gang could hang with main event talent. He was not just a random big man being fed to the stars, he was beating them, and that mattered. In those days, credibility was everything. If you could beat Dusty Rhodes, even with help, it meant you were on a different level. Dusty hated him in the storyline, of course. He saw Gang as the wall standing between him and the people's dream. Every match between them told the same story. Dusty fighting from underneath, using heart and fire to battle back against this mountain of a man who kept cutting him off. The crowd would rally behind Dusty every time, chanting his name, stomping their feet, waiting for that moment when he would finally knock the giant down. And when Gang won, the hate was real. Fans would throw cups, yell insults, and boo him out of the building. That was how good he was at his job. He made people feel something. And that is the whole art of being a great wrestling villain. For George Gray, these matches against Rhodes were career-changing. They showed promoters across the country that he could work on top, that he could handle big matches and tell a story in the ring. Then came Randy Savage. In early 1988, the WWF was preparing for a massive storyline shift. Hulk Hogan had dropped the World Heavyweight Championship after a controversial match involving Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase, and the title was vacated. The company needed a new champion, and they decided to settle it with a big tournament at WrestleMania 4. This was where One Man Gang got one of his biggest opportunities on the national stage. He was entered into the tournament, and in the first round, he faced another big man, Bam Bam Bigelow. It was a tough match, and both guys looked strong, but Gang advanced when Bigelow was counted out. That was an important booking move. Neither man had to lose cleanly, so both kept their credibility. In the next round, One Man Gang met Macho Man Randy Savage, who was quickly becoming one of the company's top stars. The match told a simple story. Savage was faster, smarter, and more athletic, while One Man Gang was a wrecking ball of brute strength. Savage tried to outmaneuver him, but Gang's size was overwhelming. The match ended in classic WWF fashion. One Man Gang got disqualified after trying to use his manager Slick's cane as a weapon. It was a clever finish. Savage got the win, but Gang didn't look weak. He was still the scary giant who could have beaten the champion if not for his own temper. Savage went on to win the entire tournament that night, becoming the new WWF World Heavyweight Champion. But the story with One Man Gang didn't end there. Just days later, Savage had to defend his brand new title for the first time. And guess who the opponent was? One Man Gang. This was a big deal. When a company crowns a new champion, the first person that champion beats sets the tone for their entire reign. They needed someone who fans saw as dangerous and legitimate, someone who would make Savage look like a real hero for surviving. That's what One Man Gang was there for. Savage beat him cleanly, and it instantly gave the new champion credibility. Fans saw Savage overcome this huge, unstoppable villain, and it made his victory feel real. That's something promoters always understood about George Gray. He could make your star look like $1,000,000. He was the kind of heel that everyone loved to hate. After that run as One Man Gang, the WWF decided to reinvent him. They gave him a wild new persona called Akeem, the African Dream. It was an over-the-top, cartoonish character that reflected how the company liked to do things at the time. Loud, exaggerated, and larger than life. They introduced Akeem in a segment where his manager Slick took him back to Africa for a supposed spiritual transformation. It was ridiculous, even by wrestling standards, but somehow it worked. Fans laughed, but they also paid attention. Akeem became one of those characters people couldn't forget, no matter how strange the gimmick was. Soon after, he teamed up with another big man, the Big Boss Man, and together they formed one of the most intimidating duos of the era, the Twin Towers. Boss Man was the mean ex-prison guard, and Akeem was this unpredictable powerhouse. Managed by Slick, they looked like trouble from the second they walked down the aisle. The Twin Towers weren't just another tag team, though. They were placed right in the middle of one of the WWF's biggest storylines ever, the rise and fall of the Mega Powers. If you were a wrestling fan in the late 80s, you know how big the Mega Powers were. Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage teaming up felt like a dream come true. They were the two biggest stars in the world, and together, they seemed unstoppable. But in wrestling, nothing stays perfect for long. Behind the smiles and handshakes, cracks were starting to form. Savage was getting jealous of Hogan's attention toward Miss Elizabeth, who managed both of them. That jealousy was building slowly, and the company needed a big, believable moment to finally blow everything up. That's where Akeem and the Twin Towers came in. On February 3, 1989, the WWF aired the Main Event 2 live on NBC. The Twin Towers were set to face the Mega Powers in a tag team match, and millions of fans were watching at home. What happened that night would change everything. During the match, Akeem threw Randy Savage out of the ring with all his strength. Savage flew through the ropes and crashed right into Miss Elizabeth, knocking her out cold. It looked brutal. The crowd went silent for a second because it felt real. Hogan immediately jumped out of the ring, scooped up Elizabeth, and carried her backstage to get help. While all that was happening, Savage was left alone in the ring against both Twin Towers. They beat him down hard. By the time Hogan came back, Savage was furious. He thought Hogan had abandoned him to play the hero for Elizabeth. The argument got heated. Savage yelled, shoved Hogan, and finally slapped him across the face. He stormed off with his championship belt, and later that night, he attacked Hogan backstage with it. That was it. The Mega Powers were finished. The biggest friendship in wrestling had just exploded on live TV. And believe it or not, it all happened because of Akeem. Lastly, by the end of his WWF run, George Gray found himself wrapped up in one last storyline that would close out his time there. It centered on his former tag team partner, Big Boss Man. The two had been part of the Twin Towers, managed by Slick, but now things were changing. Big Boss Man was turning into a good guy. For that shift to really work, he needed to break free from his old crew and prove that he was no longer the villain fans used to boo. That's where Akeem came in. To make Boss Man's face turn believable, he needed to defeat his past, and that meant taking down his old partner. Their story built up to a short but memorable match at WrestleMania 6 on April 1st, 1990. The crowd was huge, the energy was high, and everyone knew this was Boss Man's moment. When the bell rang, it didn't take long for him to get it done. Despite a brief distraction from Ted DiBiase, Big Boss Man beat Akeem cleanly in just under 2 minutes. The match was short, but it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Boss Man looked strong, determined, and heroic. Akeem, on the other hand, did his job perfectly, losing cleanly so his former partner's new role as a good guy would feel earned. For George Gray, it was another example of how professional he was. He always understood what the story needed, even if it meant taking the fall. Not long after that, Akeem quietly left the WWF, closing the book on that chapter of his career. Looking back on George Gray's career, it's clear that his story was about more than wins and losses. His feuds with legends like Dusty Rhodes, Jim Duggan, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, the Mega Powers, Big Boss Man, and El Gigante showed just how important his role really was. The hatred his character inspired wasn't accidental, it was by design. He was the guy promoters could rely on to make the fans care, to make the heroes shine brighter, and to make the stories feel real. Gray gave every company he worked for exactly what they needed. When Jim Duggan was leaving the UWF for the WWF, it was one-man gang who beat him in a loser leaves town match, giving Duggan a believable reason to move on while keeping his reputation intact. When Randy Savage won the WWF title, it was one-man gang who gave him his first major challenge, helping establish Savage as a credible champion. When the WWF needed a physical moment to break up the Mega Powers, it was Akeem who made that happen. Even when the time came for Big Boss Man's redemption, George Gray was there once again to make it work. He took the quick, decisive loss that gave his partner the clean slate he needed. And when WCW needed someone to make a giant like El Gigante look like a threat, Gray stepped in and did the job. That was his gift. He could lose without ever losing credibility. He could take punishment, get pinned, get humiliated, and still look like a dangerous, believable threat the next time he showed up. Very few wrestlers could pull that off consistently over decades, but Gray did it. He was the kind of performer every locker room needs, steady, professional, and selfless. He didn't chase the spotlight, he built it for others. That's why his peers respected him so much. George Gray's legacy isn't about titles or glory, it's about reliability. He was the villain fans loved to hate, the mountain every hero had to climb, and the guy who made sure every story hit the right emotional notes. He didn't just play a monster, he understood what that role meant. Whether he was Crusher Broomfield, One Man Gang, or Akeem the African Dream, he knew how to make a story work. He gave meaning to victories, weight to rivalries, and credibility to champions. In an industry built on storytelling, that's one of the highest compliments you can give. When you look back at all the names he helped elevate and all the moments he helped create, you can see his true impact. He might not have been the top guy, but without him, a lot of top guys wouldn't have looked nearly as good. George Gray was more than just a heel. He was the glue that held stories together, and that's what makes his career worth remembering.